friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time, and I'm here today to talk about using your various dairy powders. I'm just going to give you some real basic tips, but the thing is, when it comes to any of these, it's really all about you and at least having a place to start and then making it however you want, because it's also going to vary according to the recipes you are using them in. So standard measurements for something that's going to be more liquid and not thick, like a cream cheese or sour cream, is for like your whole milk powder, your heavy cream powder, and your buttermilk powder, which I believe is right here. Then the standard measurement is about 1/4 cup of powder to 1 cup of water. And then when it comes to mixing it so that you get a nice smooth consistency, if that's something you want to do right away, let's say you're making up a batch of milk that you want to keep in the fridge, then I recommend using your blender and then just putting that in there. Let's say you want to make a whole quart. So you're going to put in 4 cups of water plus 1 whole cup of your whole milk powder. Well, I keep saying whole milk. It doesn't have to say be whole milk. I just like to say that because people need to know there's more than just non-fat powdered milk, and the whole milk is going to be better for you and it's going to taste better. So then you just process it in your blender, and now you've got your quart ready, and then just store it in a quart-sized canning jar in your fridge or whatever receptacle you want to store it in. And that's going to work better to work out the lumps, because even in fresh bags of powdered milk, sometimes you're still going to have lumps, but the older it is, sometimes it does kind of want to clump together. And so being able to blend it, or you can also use a stick blender in the receptacle that you're going to store it in. That's another way that might be more simple yet, because you're going to have a little bit less to wash when it comes to that. But then when it comes to things like your butter powder, your cream cheese powder, which I think is what this is, your heavy cream powder, those things are going to be thicker anyway. And it's also going to vary depending on the thickness you want. So typically though, if you're buying these things, which I don't know how to make butter powder, I think something like that, or even heavy cream powder, you have to have a special kind of dehydrating method. They use what's called spray drying, and it's an industrial form of drying things like this. They don't actually use freeze drying in this case, which I would assume you can. If you have a freeze dryer, you can give it a try and see how that works for you. But the fat content in these things makes it very different. So like for the cream cheese and whatnot, usually it's a different kind of method that's used. But at any rate, if you're buying the packages, it will say right on the side how much. Like for the heavy cream powder in particular is going to be a higher ratio, because it's 3/8 of a cup of your powder to 1 cup of water, unlike the milk that is in the buttermilk, which is typically a 1/4 cup. So it's going to be a little bit more, but you can still vary those amounts according to how rich you want something to be. Same thing goes with your sour cream powder or your cream cheese powder. They're going to give you an idea, but you don't have to stick with that alone. You can do it however you want. That's why I love working with powders, is you don't have to stick to whatever's on the package. But a lot of people will ask me this, and it's like, well, if you already bought a package, it should say right on there how to blend it. And so I did a video a few years ago on the butter powder, which I'll link to down below, where I talk more about how I used it. But again, it's something that you can mix with and have it be kind of runny and just pour it over popcorn, or you can have it be thicker to make it, more spreadable for putting on toast, or you can add even less water and have it be even thicker yet. But anyway, it's just fun because you can switch it up however you want. Actually, what I've done with popcorn is I tried just putting melted butter on there, and then took the butter powder and sprinkled a little bit on that on top, just to get even more of that butter flavor. And then that already stuck to the butter that was in there. So it does make it a little bit more decadent, but it's quite tasty. Now this one here, the reason I didn't mention this one yet is I just put it out here because it kind of looks cool, because I've got a rainbow of colors. But this is cheese powder that I made myself, and I have a video on that. And this one I typically am going to add to either when I'm making a scrambler, I can just mix it in there with the eggs, or even the egg powder if I'm using my powdered eggs, and make my scrambler like that. So it's going to have cheese in it, or I'm going to use this in a sauce. So such as for making macaroni and cheese. So I'll be linking to that video down below, but you can buy I know Azure Standard does carry like I think it's a cheddar cheese powder. I bought some. I haven't really used it for much yet, but I do have some because I wanted to try it. The whole milk powder and the buttermilk powder I now get from Azure Standard because they do have organic, but a lot of these other ones like the heavy cream, the cream cheese, I either got from Hoosier Hill Farm, which comes in containers like this, or the Judy's. And they're pretty good brands. They have decent prices. I've been pretty happy with them for the most part. The Judy sour cream powder I heard tastes better than the Hoosier Hill, but it's all going to be up to you. Whenever you're talking powdered dairy products, they're never going to taste quite like the fresh product. But there's ways that you can use it. Like for us, we're typically not going to use the powdered milk for Patrick to use on his cereal or things like that. But I frequently turn to my powders, my dairy powders, when I'm making sauces or dips and the like. So you can use the cream cheese powder for making a good dip. Like I've made a salmon dip, and I think I've used it to make the pumpkin dip as well, because those take cream cheese. Well, it's kind of easier because you don't have to worry about softening the cream cheese. You just mix the right amount of water to get the consistency you want, and then mix it in there. And then as it sets, if it gets too thick, you can always add more water. If it doesn't thicken up enough, you can always add more powder. That's what makes them so easy to work with. Now, when it comes to making a white sauce, again, I love turning to my dairy powders. A lot of times I will use all three, the heavy cream, the whole milk powder, and the butter powder, to make just a basic white sauce to use in whatever. Whether I'm going to make a macaroni and cheese, which then I would add my own cheese powder, or I'm going to make a bechamel sauce for my moussaka, or I'm just making a turkey or chicken a la king, or a white sauce to use in a pot pie, such as chicken pot pie, beef pot pie, turkey pot pie, any of that. I mean, anything you're going to use a white sauce in. Also for casseroles, such as like a tuna noodle casserole, and I always use quotes because I almost never use tuna. I'm usually using either steelhead or salmon when I make a casserole like that. But any kind of casserole that you typically use a white sauce in, you can do this with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the basic. Usually I don't really measure this stuff out, especially when it comes to the water amount. But I did go ahead and write down a basic recipe so you guys can get an idea what I use for my basic white sauce, especially when I'm wanting it to be on the richer side. I use about a half cup of the whole milk powder, a quarter cup of the heavy cream powder, and a quarter cup of the butter powder. Now, again, I don't always use the butter powder in that. It's just going to depend on the recipe I'm making. That would be something I'd use more for the macaroni and cheese or the moussaka. Now, for the bechamel sauce for the moussaka, usually eggs are part of that. So what I do in that is I go ahead and add a couple tablespoons of my egg powder, which I have here. So I'm using all dehydrated ingredients, and these are made from my own eggs. And again, I have a video on this as well on how to dehydrate that up. And then I add about a teaspoon of salt. And for that, I also add a pinch of nutmeg for that particular sauce, a splash of wine, and about 3 cups of water to get my sauce. 2.5 to 3 cups, right around in there. If I'm doing just the other sauce without all this other stuff here, it might only be 2 to 2.5 cups of water. And it's also going to depend on how many other dried ingredients you might add in there. So a lot of times when I'm making a sauce, I might be using dehydrated meats and adding some vegetables like zucchini or my mixed greens blend and some herbs that I've dehydrated up, and so I might go with the higher ratio of water to get the proper thickness. And then of course you don't want to forget your thickener. I forgot to mention that I usually use about 1/4 cup of whatever thickener I feel like using. If I'm trying to keep it gluten-free, I'm going to use something like tapioca starch or arrowroot powder. If it doesn't matter, I might just use whatever flour I have, which is either going to be the organic unbleached white flour I now get from Azure Standard, or it's going to be my own home milled barley hard white wheat blend. And so again, 1/4 cup. And that can be any kind of thickener, whichever is your favorite to use. You can even use buckwheat flour and so much more. So for that ratio, that's typically what I use. And then you're just going to cook it until it gets nice and thick. If it gets too thick, you can always add a little bit more water. If it seems too thin, you can either add more of your dairy powders, depending on how it tastes, or even just more thickener to that. You know, maybe start with a tablespoon at a time. Now, some other things I've done with these things, like with the butter powder, I've used this as the fat replacement, even though it's not going to have as much fat in it as your real butter. I keep saying real butter. It's real butter powder, but you know what I mean. I have used this and left out any fat, no palm shortening, no butter, in making biscuits just to see what would happen, and was surprised when they just turned out fluffy and yummy and wonderful. And here's a picture of them right here. And I need to start doing that again. I keep forgetting about the butter powder in the last year or so and about using that for my biscuits, but it is really good in biscuits. And I didn't really think it would work as a fat replacement because I didn't add any kind of oil or anything else to it. And it worked out quite well. So yes, you can use the butter powder in baking, at least in biscuits, I know. I don't know how many other things because I haven't tried it in anything else to replace the fat, like, you know, pie crust or something like that. I just kind of doubt it would work, but I should try just making a small amount and see. But you know, how you learn to work with this stuff is you just get in there and start doing it. Start playing around with stuff. You don't have to make a big massive batch of any one thing to find out if you're going to like it or if it's going to work. You can always start with just a little bit. So use your math and go by the ratios that are given to you, and instead of making a whole cup of something, make a 1/4 cup instead, which might be like a teaspoon to a 1/4 cup of water or something like that. So yeah, starting small is the best way to go, and then you can just kind of play around with it and get an idea what you like best, especially according to whatever you're making. So anyway, don't forget to check out the video links I'll be putting down below, and I also have one on dehydrating yogurt. So I hope you found this helpful. If you'd like to share your own ideas of ways that you use your different dairy powders, please put those in comments down below so we can all learn from you as well. And thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.